there has been very prominent cases of Indigenous claiming people being exposed as fraudulent. And there's been high-ranking professors and lawyers and community leaders and even students who have claimed indigeneity and their claims have been proven false and knowingly false. So that being said, it's taking up the hard-won spaces and places and funding opportunities for people who are verified Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, Métis people. As much as that cultural recovery and growth and community is happening, there are also people that are knowingly in these spaces taking advantage of that. I hate to say it, but it's happening. So this is one of the reasons why we need to verify when we have this amazing tuition waiver and scholarship bursaries and admission seats, et cetera, for students. The communities are calling to post-secondary institutions, ensuring that the people claiming indigeneity are Indigenous.
Isn't university and college free for Indigenous students?
Nope.
Indigenous communities have a very fixed budget by the Government of Canada to fund post-secondary students. In most First Nations, these funds can't support all students, and they don't cover total tuition, nor do they cover living expenses or other expenses associated with going to post-secondary. The University of Waterloo in Ontario has created an innovative program never seen in Canada before that offers a tuition waiver for eligible Indigenous students. I had the honor of chatting with my good friend Melissa Ireland, the Director of Indigenous Relations at the University of Waterloo, who worked closely on this program to build it to where it is now and to the point where it is now ready for Indigenous applicants to go through the process of applying for their tuition waiver. Stay tuned to watch more.
All the many reasons why folks might not have the tools in place or the cards or the citizenship verification pieces because of the legacies of colonization. How do you create a situation where there's not one solution for everyone? So there's a lot of, I think, challenges understanding the difficulties and the nuances and the sensitivities.
Before this episode starts, I have a small favor to ask from you. 89% of people who watch this channel don't subscribe. So if you've ever liked any of the videos we've posted, if you like this channel, can you please do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button? It helps the channel more than you know, and the bigger the channel gets, the better we can together make an impact towards Indigenous truth and reconciliation. Thank you and enjoy this episode.
Very simply, what is going on is that the University of Waterloo is waiving all tuition fees for the nations whose territories in which we reside. So the University of Waterloo and its campuses are on the Haldimand Tract. And that being said, any member of Six Nations of the Grand River or Mississaugas of Credit First Nation receive no tuition charges when they're taking undergraduate programs or graduate programs. I do want to add to that, there's a couple things that I've also since learned. We are also honoring the Jay Treaty, meaning that any Indigenous person in the United States, so who are enrolled in a federally recognized tribe, they, from the United States, can come to study at the University of Waterloo with domestic Ontario tuition rates instead of international student fees. So that is something that was amazing. And then lastly, we are also accepting any Indigenous person who is verified to receive Ontario domestic tuition. So whether you're from BC, Alberta, Northwest Territories, and you are an Indigenous person, you're First Nations, Métis, or Inuit, you will receive Ontario domestic tuition at the University of Waterloo.
That's incredible. I can't even imagine what that must feel like to be able to share that with people and what some of those responses have been. Like, I know I don't have this question on there, but what have been some of your responses when you share that with people?
Yeah, it's very exciting. So it's definitely a great conversation starter. I've also been in conversations where senior presidents at universities are calling our offices asking how we did it. So that feels very innovative and complementary. But on the flip side, I'm also getting conversations from First Nation communities who want to have the conversation with their local education institutes. So I don't know if we want to talk about our connection, Mallory, but Curve Lake First Nation actually connected with us to talk about what does that look like from a community perspective to check in with the university and colleges in their territory. So it's really neat to be able to support the dialogue from the community perspective and the dialogue from the post-secondary institute perspective. So yes, it's groundbreaking. We're having great conversations. People are excited. We're also really thinking hard about, are we ready for the inundation, the flood of Indigenous students coming in the coming days? So we announced the tuition waiver kind of at the stage this year where admissions and intake had already been in the works for fall. So we will probably see a bigger intake come fall 2024.
There's so many opportunities that are emerging because of this work that are at a much larger scope than your role, that are national opportunities to create relationships and create connections with post-secondary leaders across the nation. Do you see yourself getting involved in those kinds of conversations in a more formal capacity?
I think yes. And I think that it's really broadened since post TRC. So I think that all of the good work that Indigenous communities and leaders and educators are doing to inform outcomes of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's work and the broader, I think, exposure that Indigenous folks are getting on social media and online, and then just the quality training resources and access to information. I think that's led to opening the hearts and minds of decision makers and policyholders and people who can make change to think, okay, well, what am I doing for reconciliation? What am I doing to support closing the Indigenous educational achievement gap? What am I doing to make safe or brave spaces for Indigenous people where I work? And that's not just happening in post-secondary, but I think that because of that work, we're benefiting from it.
That's incredible. Wow. My next question for you, Melissa, is for those who are newer at this conversation and newer on their journey of reconciliation and education in terms of Indigenous treaties and history, what would you say to people who are completely unaware of history and treaties, and they see these amazing programs like this offered to Indigenous students, and they think that we or these students are maybe getting special treatment? How would you handle those kinds of conversations, whether it's yourself or other members of your team?
That's a great question. And I think that it's important to show people the history and talk about how the treaties came to be and understanding the legacy of colonization and that conversation that it brings. And then it leads you to the place and the realization and discovery, whether you're a settler or a non-Indigenous person, an ally. We are all treaty people. We all have responsibilities to honor the promises and commitments made to the people of the land. And when people learn this, the true history, the conversation isn't, I would say, a roadblock. And if they don't understand, or if we're still getting opposition, it's really when they do more learning, they come back and they say, now I see, now I understand why it's so important to open doors and remove barriers and bring inclusion to places that never had it before. And so people are exposed to some really great learning that haven't existed in the past, and access, like I said before, to the opportunities, the online trainings, the YouTube channels, the TikTok content creators. Like, these things like seem like drop in the buckets, but they're making a difference. And it's hard to just point to one because there's so many out there. But I tend to start with these conversations with the understanding that person's history, and then asking their own social location. And then from that, talking about the land where we sit now. So I'm in the Haldeman Tract, and I start there, and I start with the land here. And then it sort of just opens up a pathway to bring them to a place where they do understand and they do get it. And luckily, I work in an industry where knowledge and knowledge creation and learning is upheld, and everyone aspires to learning as much as they can. And even if you're staff, even if you're a student in a faculty, these educational spaces really breed, that true pursuit of learning. And I'm not necessarily in spaces where people choose ignorance.
Right.
So I'm lucky in that in a post-secondary context, if people don't know and there's resistance, often when you give them the right knowledge and tools, they do want to learn, and then they come back as sometimes your fiercest allies.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like working in an Indigenous relations role from one industry to the next, depending on the norms and the expectations and the values of those different industries and the thought processes is like night and day, right? If you're in an educational environment versus like I'm just going to say a non-education focused environment. But that's a really, really good highlight. And I know that there has been a tremendous amount of movement and I guess you could say a revolution of more people celebrating and leaning into their Indigenous identity where otherwise they wouldn't. Now, with this, there has been like some like controversy and like different, I guess you could say, events or people that are maybe identifying who aren't actually identifying, but just overall kind of introductory to this topic. How would you say that the movement of the increasing number of self-identifying Indigenous people, whether it is like a minimal percentage or full percentage lineage, how did that movement of an increasing number of self-identifying people play a factor in the creation of this program? And was that a big part of the conversation? How big and like how did that go down?
I think because I wasn't a part of those conversations here in early days, I don't know if my answer is going to be reflective of the developing of the program. But what I can say is that I love in this work seeing the reclamation and recovery of our culture and our languages, the sense of pride, the community connection. It's real. And personally, for me, it's helped with my own personal healing of family trauma or my internal healing that needed to be done. So the more I learned, the more community that I found, the more songs I've sung, the more ceremonies I've attended, the more books I've read. That has helped me, walk taller and with more pride. And I see that in others. And I see more people through the years doing this work being really proud of taking up their place in the circle and learning about who they are. And I would say that I've been really lucky in most cases and spaces. The people that I meet do it with good intentions and a pure heart and come for the connection and the community and the culture and that vibrancy that comes with cultural reclamation or recovery, or even those who have always known who they are, right? And walk tall. And so there's all of that. But the fact that is that it's different now than it was 20 years ago to be in a room and say, I'm Indigenous. Mm-hmm. There's more acceptance. I think there's more tolerance and there's more inclusion, and more people are less apt to have, radical responses or racialized conversations that are negative. So I see there's a lot of positive. I will say, though, that we're also existing in a time, and it's been shown that in academia, especially in the last couple of years, there has been very prominent cases of Indigenous claiming people being exposed as fraudulent. And there's been high-ranking professors and lawyers and community leaders and even students who have claimed indigeneity, and their claims have been proven false and knowingly false. So that being said, it's taking up the hard-won spaces and places and funding opportunities for people who are verified Indigenous, First Nations, Inuit, Métis people. Mm-hmm. So as much as that cultural recovery and growth and community is happening, there are also people that are knowingly in these spaces taking advantage of that. I hate to say it, but it's happening. And so this is one of the reasons why, having, we need to verify when we have this amazing tuition waiver and scholarship bursaries and admission seats, et cetera, for students. The communities are calling to post-secondary institutions, universities, not just us, but art sector, research dollars. Like, how are those people holding these opportunities, ensuring that the people claiming indigeneity are Indigenous? And so that's the conversation and question and process and protocols we've been trying to create.
What a delicate conversation to have with someone that could be entering the territory of their claims being knowingly false, as you've just you've clearly explained that as being like some of their self-identity claims being knowingly false, not just, oh, they're false because they're not being verified to the standards of whatever they're applying for, but they actually, in their own minds, have known it to be false from the beginning. I can't imagine what those conversations would be like and what stir up of emotions that would drive for people that are involved in those conversations. Because I know that you talked a bit about the process of healing when you are even self-identifying in a room or on a form. And that's a lot of the content that I kind of support my audience in, is knowing what spaces are safe to self-identify in, and how that process can feel like imposter territory sometimes. And even students that might be really have their sights on your school and really like programs that UW offers, and they're really excited about it, and they're contemplating whether they should self-identify or not. That's a complex task all on its own. So I feel, how has that been part of the conversation, and how does your department or the university as a whole ensure that those psychological and cultural safety supports are in place and meeting the needs of fully eligible Indigenous students?
Yeah, that's a great question. We understand that hearing the words like verified or unrecognized community or invalid or those kind of things could create harm. We are really hoping that we get the clear message that we are, not doing Indigenous identity verification. We are actually verifying First Nation, Inuit, Métis membership and citizenship. So that's something that we're doing. We can't, as a university, say who's Indigenous and who's not. That's up to the community. So that's a piece of this work that I've learned to communicate. But here's another piece, is that self-ID Indigenous students, there's still a spot for that as well. So we are verifying when it comes to perceived material benefits. However, that does not impact access to services like using services at the Waterloo Indigenous Student Center, or attending events or programming, or accessing of an Indigenous counselor. Like, we're not carding folks for services, but we are doing verification membership, citizenship verification when it comes to scholarships and bursaries, when it comes to designated hiring, when it comes to anything related to admissions, seats, or when Indigenous identity is in play.
Love that. Thank you for clarifying that so well. I can tell that you've been working really hard on this, and as a marketer, the communication side of this is so crucial. So it sounds like you've got that down really well. So great job. Now, the development, I know you weren't on the development of this project from day one, but in terms of like your exposure thus far and getting kind of up to speed with everyone that has been on it from day one, what would you say was the biggest hurdle that your team had to overcome in the development of this program? And then how do you think that was overcome?
I think with any new process, when you trailblaze and everything's new, it's hard. And then when you take into account all the many reasons why folks might not have the tools in place or the cards or the citizenship verification pieces because of the legacies of colonization, how do you create a situation where there's not one solution for everyone? So there's a lot of, I think, challenges understanding the difficulties and the nuances and the sensitivities. And so I know that you asked for one challenge, but I feel like that piece in itself is the hurdle, is understanding the nuances and complexities overall. And as Indigenous people and communities, we understand what gatekeeping is, and upholding colonial norms, and that in itself is painful. And the fact that we have to create these processes and enact them as Indigenous people can be challenging, but trying to create processes that aren't just you upload a document and then it's verified or not verified. Like, we did create some mechanisms in the guidelines to ensure that we could capture situations where people don't have necessarily the documentation.
Okay.
So we are also blessed to have a committee of Indigenous scholars on campus that can work and review where individual cases don't necessarily meet the criteria of having a membership card from a First Nations, Inuit, or Métis community. So that is, I think, a hurdle. And then having this committee to guide the work and to create supports when those situations don't quite fit is a challenge and a solution. So I would say those are some of the hurdles we faced. I think that one other thing that's sort of been really great in helping us do the work and is providing support. So we had a recent hire in what we call the center. So this is a place central on campus that isn't Indigenous student services. It isn't like an Indigenous specific area. It's the area where all students get service, but we hired an Indigenous specific role called an Indigenous Student Support Specialist to be able to help guide conversations related to navigating the university systems, and then this piece being one of the systems to navigate. So thinking about that from an operational perspective has been really advantageous. And so that is one other piece that helps solve the problems, because when you have all these complex nuances and many departments working together, so we've got like IT, we've got registrar's office, we have our office, and trying to communicate all the things and create the systems in place to do all that. We need somebody to support the connections with students. And so having that role has been really helpful.
Our history of knowing each other and the way that we first met at Laurier, and your role at the Aboriginal Student Center there, and watching you grow and develop and become such a leader in the education space and Indigenous relations space, and see what you have achieved is so beautiful. And I'm so proud of you, and congratulations for your successes. And I'm just honored to know you and to be your friend and be a supporter of yours. And as I know you're a supporter of mine, and just, I'm so appreciative and grateful and honored to have your story shared with me. And just thank you so much for your time and your honesty and openness and your smile.
Oh, miigwech, Mal. I feel the same way about you. And it was an honor to be here. And thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an incredible day, and we'll see you next time.